This conference will now be recorded.
Hello, everybody. Jordan Girth here from the National Weather Service Office of Observations. Thank you for joining us for the Satellite Book Club Seminar Series. This is session number 70. Hope your fall is off to a good start. Everybody's staying well. Great presentation on tap for today. Looking back at the summer, it's radar down, severe risk up. Patrick Ide, the Science and Operations Officer, is going to share the virtual stage with Joe Moore, Warning Coordination Meteorologist, both at the Weather Forecast Office in Duluth. Our facilitator, Stephen Rowley, Science and Operations Officer at the Forecast Office in Charleston, South Carolina. Just a few reminders before we get started that this session is being recorded. There'll be an opportunity for Q&A after the presentation, and that Q&A extends to discussion, particularly from our forecast offices and regional headquarters. So if you're out there in the field and you have something to say about this event or a similar event and you want to provide some comments, please just indicate in the chat. You can unmute and we can have a discussion that way as well. We're always looking for future presenters, so if you have an application you'd like to share with your colleagues in the field, please get in touch with us. We've, as I just mentioned, we're at 70 Satellite Book Clubs so far. We want to continue this good trend, and thanks for all of you for being with us today to help with that. The training team can help create training materials that may be unavailable or point you to materials that you may be unaware of. Brian Mott, the Office of the Chief Learning Officer, can help with that. Just like to thank our Tower S team, particularly Kashad Bowman, the Office of the Chief Learning Officer, and the GOZAR and JPSS teams for their support of the book club. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Patrick and Joe. Patrick has been the SU at NWS Duluth since January of 2020. Previously worked 12 years at NWS Bismarck and was a SCEP in Grand Forks. Patrick has developed multiple reference guides and given several presentations at workshops, conferences, and training webinars on GOES 16 and 17 topics. And joining him is Joe Moore, the Warning Coordination Meteorologist in Duluth. He has interest in data visualization, GIS, and leveraging emerging tech in NWS forecast and warning operations. He's been with the Weather Service since 2011, working for Meteorological Development Lab in Silver Spring and WFO Goodland, Kansas, before coming to Duluth in 2014. So a lot of experience today, and looking forward to your presentation. Patrick, welcome back to the book club.
Well, thank you very much, Jordan. And Joe will be chiming in along the way as well. I appreciate his efforts in this. So we're going to take you through probably one of those scenarios that I'm sure many of us have encountered, dealing with system issues, and rather significant ones during our severe weather events. So we're going to take you back to July 26th of this year to kind of discuss what to do when our primary radar is down. So obviously the title is Radar Down, Severe Risk Up, and this is the progression of SPC from days 3 through 1, and you can see the colors getting warmer as we move into from day 3 to day 1. So increasing threat, and for the most part, nothing particularly outstanding of, usual foreseeing and capping uncertainties, which is just life up north here and pretty much everywhere. Dealing with severe convection, but it's just kind of ramping up each day, the severe threat. So again, nothing particularly outstanding there until you throw in your radar going down hard. So around 2 p.m., it went down hard, and we got to hand it to our ESA David Schwemline, absolute all-star. Hours upon hours of trying to get it back up, and at about 5 o'clock, realized we're not going to get it back up. And so that really gave us the time to adapt our warning ops preparation, our AWIPs. Go ahead, someone chiming in? Never mind, I'll keep rolling. So about 5, I think someone's not. About 5 p.m. we adapted our warning operations preparation, including our AWIP setups and our staffing and position assignments, to really get prepared for having no radar. And in a sense, this was actually an advantage. Instead of having to go down during the event, we had the time to be able to get everything set up in AWIPs that we need to say goodbye to our primary radar, and this is just how we're going to have to get through the event. So that I think was actually an advantage, knowing beforehand that we were not going to have it. And our ESA kept troubleshooting until he eventually had to stop at about 8 o'clock because being in the radome and having lightning is probably not the best combination. So against what he wanted to do, we had to get him out of there. So we'll quick go over just an overview of the event real quick, a little bit of meso-A, and just kind of talk about best practices for the most part. So just to give you a taste, this is actually one of our bigger events of the year, especially being up here in northern Minnesota, northwest Wisconsin. Our convective season is a short window, and so we don't get always a lot of at-bats. And when we got our at-bat, we didn't really have our favorite bat in hand. So a total of 25 warnings, most of them severes. We had about 8 hours of warning ops with a little break in there from about 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. So 20 severes, 2 tours, and there's always that wrinkle for us of having to cover for special marine warnings the western third of Lake Superior. And for the most part, we really had a solid performance. And I'll tell you that who we had working the radar were some of our newest people. Crystal Koss and Lee Britt, outstanding job adapting to the situation of not having their primary radar, not being able to employ everything they just learned in RAC, but working with a higher graded forecaster with them. And they just did an outstanding job adapting to the situation and what it was, and really being successful in it. So I really want to give them a shout out as we did in the CR guest speaker series. Outstanding work from our newest folks. It wasn't marginal severe either. We had 3-inch hail raining down on various portions of our CWA and significant wind damage across one of our bigger towns in Grand Rapids. So this wasn't a marginal severe weather event either. It was, again, one of our larger events, and one where, it's, well, I guess anyone, you still would love to have your primary radar. So, and there's the mesh tracks, just long-lived, higher end convection. So. Okay, so kind of just to give context, radar goes down. There are the 200-mile range rings from all of our surrounding radars. So especially where some of that convection was just north of Duluth, you are a long, long ways away from any of the surrounding radars. The convection got started in entered our western part of your CWA, where coverage is, even for the Duluth radar, you're shooting way up there. Right, so those are 200-mile range rings. So we primarily try to use Mayville and Minneapolis, and we'll toggle back and forth. And you can see those range rings get pretty big, especially as you get more into the heart of our CWA, which we'll go into, well, what do we do with that in a second? One thing is, MRMS was, not the biggest help per se because of the Canadian S-band radars not being included. So MRMS, including those, did not help to fill in a whole lot of gaps because, again, those S-band radars are not in MRMS. And boy, it would really be nice to get those S-band radars as well into AWIP. So there's kind of that, again, that whole, not only from a dedicated radar and primary radar perspective, but also from an MRMS perspective related to the Canadian radar. So I'll stop there. Joe, do you have anything you wanted to toss in there, or I'll keep rolling?
No, keep on rolling.
10-4, will do. Okay, so getting more into the methodology, what do you do? Okay, so I think it gets into risk management versus risk aversion. And so we're gonna have to adjust our confidence thresholds for issuing a warning, no doubt. You're not gonna have all the tools, you're not gonna have the same confidence to issue. So it's, we could just warn on red, but we don't wanna do that. We wanna not just warn on red, but warn on red intelligently. And so, well, that's kind of a fancy way to say it, but what does that actually mean? So coming out of the Central Region TWIP, and I'm sure other places too, it's just this rule of 2 out of 3. And it's radar, it's environment, which I think for the most part we lump satellite in there into more of the environment circle, and then reports. So when you lose your radar, what are you going to do? You got to use this modified 2 out of 3, where we really balloon up the environment and the reports, and we substitute as much of that radar as we can with satellite. So kind of chunk satellite out of environment and really put it, into our pseudo radar essentially as best we can. So this is kind of what we try to employ, and we'll go through that of how we tried to accomplish that. So Again, risk management versus risk aversion, that's kind of the whole game of warning and ops, whether you have a radar or not, whether you have, a GOES mesosector or not. So, how are we going to adjust our confidence thresholds? And we'll dive more into the satellite here very quickly. But as you'll see for severes, hey, favorable environment. So if the satellite signals are really presenting themselves and just some distant radar signal to support it, jump on that severe and we'll recalibrate with reports. If we did issue a couple tornadoes, that's tough. That's always tough. Satellite's not going to help you much there, right? But at least you can kind of have an understanding of what are the trends in that convection to see, well, if it's still in the same environment, still maintaining the same strength, especially based on whatever distant radar or satellite signal you have, probably just keep it going. Special marine warnings, it's kind of a little easier. You only need 34 knots and pennies for those who aren't marine officers. For the most part, given our environment we had, we're gonna issue those pretty quickly. So in a way, actually not having our primary radar it almost made things simpler because you had to be simpler. You had so much less data to work with. So here's just the SBC Meso A. What? Really steep mid-level lapse rates and a lot of shear. Check some boxes really quickly, right? And I think sometimes it's keeping it simple and recognizing those conceptual models early and using that as a lens to view everything else. We started up mesoanalysis very early in the day, in the morning. Here's just some screen captures from our ops chat. We'll show a loop of this next. We saw it kind of, on the edge of this EML, which we'll show in satellite a little bit later, this bubbling in southern Canada. And it wouldn't go away, and it wouldn't go away, and it wouldn't go away. So that is essentially what turned into our convection later that afternoon and evening that developed over us. But recognizing that, I mean, hours upon hours in advance of this bubbling that we were seeing, especially in the mid-levels across southern Canada on the edge of the EML, matches a lot of conceptual models that developed eventually into our severe convection. It wouldn't be a meso A if you didn't put in a little hand analysis there, and that's my own sad face of I got a little too happy with the red colored pencil too quickly and misplaced the warm front, but hey, close enough, I guess. Again, from that telework meso A, we saw it in the satellite. Here's from the Mayville radar of, boy, we have this bubbling convection that's not going away and not going away. It's presented itself more and more in the satellite, presented itself more and more in the radar. Well, the HER doesn't have it. So, maybe I need to adjust how much weight I'm giving to the HER. That's something that's really tried to preach a lot to our folks, especially is being aware of these holes in convection, or where you're not seeing convection in the HER compared to what you're seeing in the satellite and the radar. And how is that affecting my downstream solutions? How is that impacting convective evolution? How is that impacting cold pool development and squashing instability? So really trying to marry the two of those together, of fusing what we're seeing within our observational platforms and really not just giving a quick pass to the HER if it doesn't have the convection and jumping, 6 hours from now, boy, look at that, what it has. Well, wait a second, back up. What is it showing now? And giving a little bit more weight to that. I think that's something that we need to really try to work on a little bit more. And again, keeping it simple. It's remembering our upstream observations. I mean, we have Minneapolis and International Falls, but our air is not necessarily always coming from International Falls or Minneapolis, right? So it's remembering, look upstream, Bismarck, Aberdeen, boy, that's quite the EML coming our way. Those are pretty long photographs coming our way. And so recognizing again that early. So this is a satellite talk, right? So I guess we should show some type of satellite. And again, it was, I think it's really about keeping it really simple. And it doesn't always apply when we lost our radar, but even just in our approach to mesoanalysis of, keep it simple with long loops of water vapor and visible, and just take it in. What stands out to you? We don't need to dig deeper in all these different products and RGBs all the time. Just long loops of basic things, they tell you a lot. What do we see? Man, that is one impressive EML that is across the Dakotas into Minnesota. We essentially see the gradient of the EML, marches right on into Duluth. And we see that bubbling convection on the northern periphery of that EML marching all the way down into our neck of the woods and essentially becoming our convection for that night. So it was this early mesoanalysis of recognizing that development, which wasn't necessarily well captured by the NWP. So it's that strong mesoanalysis and foundational simple things. And there's the visible, thanks to Lee Byerly grabbing this. We had a little snafu with some of our archiving, so I appreciate his help in that. And you see that, the convective towers continue to develop and essentially consolidate from southern Manitoba and eventually becoming one whopper of a supercell into the Grand Forks CWA. And again, not necessarily well handled by the NWP, and early on recognizing that of, hey, what do we see going on with the satellite and reflected on the radar? And that's not necessarily being captured well by the NWP. So I need to kind of readjust, recalibrate how I expect this event to go. All right, in a way, right, it was simpler, right? So obviously lightning trends are your friend. Nothing new here. But one thing that we've really worked on, I picked this up from a colleague of mine at Bismarck, Alex Edwards, is adjusting the color map range for the GLM. Default is 256. So we've tamped that down, and you can change the color map, the max and min options. We've tamped that down to 128 or 64. And you can see that it really helps to make the increases in the lightning really stand out to a much greater extent. Especially, this is a big help for our part of the country where our convection tends to be a little bit more marginal. And having that full 256 range, we're kind of more stuck in the blues and cyans, so it's harder just to get those signals to jump out. But we really found that good practice of limiting that GLM flash extent density color map range, limited to 128 or 64 maybe if you're on the shoulder seasons. It really helps to make those differences in the lighting of those jumps really stand out a lot more in the GLM data. So that was a big help. Again, how best can we use the GLM to be our pseudo light or a pseudo radar essentially? And so a big help to that is playing around with some of the color map ranges. One thing that we're still trying to work on, or just kind of figure out how best to work in our workflow, is the minimum flash area, or the MFA. We had it up, but maybe it's a color map issue, but at some point there's everything had a lot of short minimum flash areas, right? And especially when the convection's mature. So is there more signal that we can tease out by just maybe playing around with the color map? So again, we had it up at times, but just didn't necessarily have as much utility, at least at this point. Maybe it's just we had a slow convective season, so maybe it's not enough. Just need more at bats with it. But it could also be potentially with do we need to adjust the color map a little bit more to tease things out, especially kind of when everything is getting to those shorter flashes? Is there more we can bring out at those shorter flash areas that's going to be significant? I don't necessarily have the answer to that, but I think with a lot of our products now, we've pulled out a lot of the processes and signals, and I think a lot of it just has to do with the way we're visualizing it and playing around with our color curves and visualizations to really bring out the signals even more.
Yeah, Patrick, if I might just interject there. So another kind of challenge with this too is that we are so used to having the radar for severe weather operations that we talk ahead of time, and in the pre-convective environment we're using satellite. But usually when the convection gets going, when warning ops have started, we are so focused in on the radar that we don't, I think, get enough experience using the satellite for warning operations and using these other products from GLM as much as we could. And so then our skill for actually using them when they become one of the primary tools that we have is maybe less than it could be if we were using them more in our real-time operations.
No, that's a great point, Joe. It really is. It's about how we manage our AWIPS real estate, right? And some people like 4 panels. Some people like 4 panels of panel combo rotate. Some people like 9. Some people like some 25 panel to have everything screaming at you at once. And it's how best are you managing your AWIPS real estate? And everyone takes data in differently. And so I've been trying to in my radar interrogation to It's a 9-panel, mostly all tilts-based data, and then working in at least a panel or two of some type of some satellite, GLM and some visible, or the sandwich product. And it's, I think, trying to it's as simple as sometimes, is it even on your AWIP's real estate in your primary radar interrogation procedures or not? Getting some of that satellite worked in. So I think that's a great point, Joe. All right, somewhat unrelated to satellite, but we can probably bring it there. What do you do with a tornadic supercell that's coming into your area with no radar? Well, we had to deal with that. So we're about 100 to 115 nautical miles from the Mayville radar, which is just south of the Grand Forks office. That puts us at a lovely 13 to 16,000 foot lowest elevation. And out of Duluth, it's not a whole lot better either. So at this point, there's not at least a massive disadvantage yet to having used the Mayville radar. So what do you do? Well, what's the modified rule of 2 out of 3 going to tell you? I have the meso-A up there, and the 0 to 500 meter SRH and LCLs aren't screaming tornado, but we're in a highly sheared and unstable environment. So we have an impressive supercell out there. So what do? Well, just don't overthink it. Just go ahead and issue the darn thing, right? Lowest scan is about 15,000 feet. All we can see is a strong meso. It's not changing that much intensity, and you could, whether that's from distant radar, if you wanted to see it from satellite trends. So don't overthink it. There's not much to say the threat has gone up or down. So we just kept it simple, kept the warning going until we had a little bit better information that we could go on. But it's all about in the moment, lowering. Hey, we're going to have to be comfortable with dealing with not all the information we want, and we can't let that bog down our time to make a decision. So from that, what could have gone better? I think one thing is a challenge is keeping the meso-A effort going. Well, we got it started early in the morning. We got it started in the morning, kept it through the afternoon, and then it becomes, well, how do you keep it going through the night, especially for that convection, southeast of Duluth there, that got going in the early morning hours that night. It's really been sometimes a challenge to be able to keep that meso-A effort going over the duration of the event. It's a staffing, how many staff are available? Are there remote mesoanalysts available as a program we have in the Central Region? We're crossing shifts. It's been a challenge, especially for really long duration events, of how do you keep that meso-A going? It's real strong at the beginning, prior to the event at the beginning, and boy, how do we keep that going is a good question. So what went well, and I know Joe will have a few more points to add to this. Well, just to keep it simple approach to operations, and that's everything, and just keeping it simple with the satellite. Just taking those big long loops of water vapor and visible, and just let the signals pop out at you. I know that's something that Dr. Ariel Cohen has really talked about. Is there's so much power in just a couple bands that if you just put your full big AWIP screen or at-home screen on a nice long loop of water vapor and visible, and just watch, and things will really start to pop out at you. You don't have to go too complex too quickly. And I think sometimes, that's kind of something that we can maybe struggle with, especially dealing with cams and things like that. Just kind of jump into those. But boy, keep it simple. We paired our forecasters well. That we gave our newer folks the chance, and we sectorized and we paired them with experienced operators, good active communication. They handled it well. They realized, what, I'm not going to be able to apply everything I just learned at RAC. I'm going to have to keep it a lot more simpler, and they really did well. We had good coordination with Minneapolis about how to operate their radar, how we want them to drive their radar, sales, muzzle sales, etc., things like that. And then, obviously, using GOES East as our pseudo radar as best we can. And not a whole lot of wow, new things that we saw here and there, but it's making sure that you have some of that satellite fused with your primary radar interrogation procedures, that they're not on a different panel that you're not, or a tab that you're not necessarily going to get to. Are there ways you can play with some of the color maps to be able to have some things really pop out at you, right? So Again, to be expected, but there's some lessons learned there from using the GOES East. We've moved the needle a lot, and I think it's just going to be these small moving the needles in using the satellite data, especially with some of the color maps and things like that, and just managing your AWIPS real estate. So, Joe, I'm sure you have probably a few things to add, so I'm going to pass it to you.
Yeah, so definitely on the keep it simple approach. One of the things, as Patrick said, we anticipated this event, not only just the severe weather, but knowing that we were going to have the radar down. So that was really nice to have because we were able to plan our staffing. And also we were able to kind of pre-plan our warning approach. So we clearly communicated to the forecast team that, to the warning ops team that we're going to draw these warnings large and we're going to make them long. Because when you draw the 45-minute default severe, in a populated metro, sure, you're getting reports every 5 minutes, but through some of these areas, I mean, I wish I could have gotten another 3-inch hail report, because I'm pretty sure we had one of the cells that just was on our CWA border probably produced 3-inch hail, but it was, literally just in a bog area. There's no cabins, there's one road, there's no businesses. So when you know the terrain that it's going through, you're not going to have any new information, 40 minutes from now for your next warning decision. And especially when we don't have the radar, keeping it simple, just draw the warning box a little bit longer, make it a little bit larger to account for things, and make it smaller as it goes on. Kind of help yourself in that warning decision process. If you can reduce the number of warning decisions you make on a warning event, you're ultimately going to make better warning decisions, because you're kind of increasing your capacity for decision making, if that makes sense. Another thing too is there's a lot of data to view, and I think we're slowly coming around to this. So one of the things that we've implemented this year, we kind of used to suggest warning teams, but we have a lot of newer folks in our office and lesser experienced folks on radar. And so now with that, and I think going forward, even as everybody gains experience, no one can look at every single little piece of data when you're working radar operations, but we're going to be better when we can look at as much data as we can. And so we really strongly feel that kind of the warning team approach, having 2 forecasters, usually someone much more experienced and then someone with a little less experience, working together so that they can look at more data and make decisions as a team, really ultimately makes better warning decisions. So our newer folks don't feel like they're acting alone, so that our more experienced folks have, kind of that capability to, essentially they get to see more data by having a team member helping them out. And so that really helps. And then the other thing that I really want to emphasize is, if you're watching this, if you're at a WFO, this was a great event because we had a lot of time. We could kind of make up a couple of procedures in the hours ahead of time to make sure that we were taking advantage of our neighboring radar sites and that sort of thing. But if you had this event happening near CWA, but maybe the radar went down halfway through, how fast can your forecasters quickly adapt to using neighboring radars and other methods? Do you have procedures either for the office, or you ensure that every single warning forecaster has procedures ready to go to in the event of one of your radars goes down? And I know RMR is probably something that the older folks in your office are very familiar with, and some newer folks might not be as experienced, but do you have all your RMR lists up to date? Does every forecaster know how to use them? Again, in this case, it was great to go into it because we had a lot of time. We could talk about what our plan was, make sure we were checking off all the boxes, but making sure that you have procedures ready to go so that your warning forecasters can quickly adapt if needed when a radar goes down or some other data source stops working, so that they can quickly adapt and still make great warning decisions. So that's all I had to add, but we can start answering some questions, or I think there might be one other slide or two. No.
I think we're done. Thank you, Joe. I'm done. No.
All righty, Patrick and Joe, thank you very much. That was a great presentation. A lot of great insight into a very challenging situation. You folks that are attending from field offices, regional headquarters folks, if you've had any experience with this, you can drop your questions into the chat room. We've got a little under 15 minutes to go through some questions. Before we do that, My name, by the way, is Steve Rowley. I'm the Science and Operations Officer in Charleston, South Carolina. I really appreciate the invitation to facilitate the questions and discussions part of this. And we've got quite a few questions lining up here already. So after a few administrative items, we'll get right to the questions that we've received. I want to encourage you there. You just showed up in the chat room. There's a link in there. If you could please fill out that short survey. There's some feedback you can offer on this session of the Satellite Book Club. So also a reminder, a week from today, be Thursday, October 14th at noon Eastern time, Dr. Andrew Heidinger, a NWS Geo senior scientist, will discuss the Cirrus Near IR band. And also a reminder that you can contact the Tower S team, Lee Byerly and Kashad Bowman, for questions about the Satellite Book Club or for configuration of satellite products. These folks have been a great help to us. Satellite products get updated a lot, and they've always been really helpful and really responsive to us. So without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get to the questions. I also have some comments here for you. And I'll take them in the order that they came. So I think we already answered one. Ben Woods had asked about how many days on average per year would you expect an enhanced risk in the Duluth CWA, and Joe Moore answered that usually about 0 to 3 enhanced risk each year. And once we get up to moderate risk, it's about every other year. So it's not a super common event. So not only was the radar down with the attendant challenges, but this is not something that happens every day, obviously, in this part of the country, right? I also had a comment from Bob Bright that we utilized the team approach at Charleston, and it seems to work well. Ideally, we'll pair more experience met with a less experienced one for training purposes, and it also helps build teamwork as a whole. And that's absolutely correct. We're very adamant about that approach. Heather Graham's also had a comment, an update on MRMS, that the new Canadian S-bands will be included in the next operational update of MRMS. That will be version 12.2. That will be early next year. And until then, you can see the experimental products with the new network. And that's included on the internal page, which the National Weather Service offices should have access to. And there is a link in the chat room there for you. Okay. Bill Soberg, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, at the JPSS program office, has a question for you. Specifically, did you look at new caps to track instability for the pre-convective environment for this case?
Yeah, thank you, but we did not use new caps. It was something that we just didn't look at. Obviously it's available there, and especially in the mid levels is where obviously it's probably going to have its best little more reliability, right, compared to the low levels to really help us track that EML. But we did not. But it's definitely something that hopefully is out there, a little more readily available, especially in AWIPS, and then we can try to kind of we can access it online if we need to. But we did not use new caps, but definitely would have been a help, especially with that 19 to 21 SZ pass over our areas generally when we get that.
Alrighty, thank you. And again, you can enter additional questions in the chat room. We'll keep going here for close to another 10 minutes. Or you can just verbally, if you think of something and you don't feel like typing the whole thing out, just let us know, and we'll answer that question as well. I've got another question here. Lots of great questions. Thank you, folks. This was a really interesting presentation. Obviously, from the volume of questions we're getting here. This is from Dan Lindsay. And how often do you make use of the 1-minute imagery when there's a meso sector over your CWA? And John Fiore also asks whether a meso was requested for this particular event when your radar was down, or was that automatic because of the enhanced risk?
Yeah, Joe, I'm trying to remember. I'm pretty sure it's probably automatic from the enhanced risk from SBC.
Yep.
Pretty much they've taken care of. We haven't really had to really request much this year. I'd say just we've been pretty slow, and it's really been Linda Engelbretson, one of our lead forecasters, said that yes, we had meso there, and when it's there, I mean, it is that is exclusive, right, to what we're using, 100%. So Dan, it's when available, we're using it. I know there's some discussions out there regarding, you know, mesosectors, and, you know, is there different ways to maybe turn down or increase the cadence of just the normal imagery, and then would we need the mesosectors and things like that? I know there's some talk about that in some of the satellite communities, but 100%, when you got the 1 minute data, we're going to use it because it's going to show signals at time, you know, before, you know, some of the radar does, and especially catching the convection on the uptrend. So primary tool when we have those available to us. And for the most part, SBC is very good about putting in those requests for us as well.
Alrighty, yeah, that's the outlook always helps with that. That's one less thing that you have to worry about. That's automatic. I know that sometimes you'll have an event that exceeds expectations, and the next thing you know, you're scrambling sometimes to try to get a mesosector. And if the weather is busy elsewhere, there's some competition for that. So that adds kind of an extra layer to this to the complexity, if you will.
No. Especially when we got, you know, especially when we have busy fire seasons. That, you know, obviously those are high priority too, and so it gets to be, you got 4, right? And there's definitely competing needs, and so, you know, that makes it a challenge. And there's been talk of whether you know, is there different ways that we can have different modes in the satellite? I know from some of the discussions I've heard of, you know, to ease that up a little bit, but severe weather and fire weather at the same time, it causes a challenge for mesosector management.
Alrighty. Yeah, we'll be interested to see how that goes, you know, how that all works out going forward. I think we're still fairly early in the MDS process, right? I have another question here from Bill Line. His question is, having worked several convective events at the Pueblo, Colorado office with the radar down, and these are planned and unplanned outages, we always make sure to request and utilize a GOES mesosector. Knowledge of the environment plus storm top analysis and vis-IR imagery is always key to decision making. More of a comment, I guess, from Bill. So that's excellent. I appreciate that, Bill. You know, yeah, and where you folks are out in the mountains, out, you know, with the Rocky Mountains out there, in a somewhat data sparse environment, having visited there pretty frequently, it's a real tough environment out there. So yeah, the mesosectors are really important. You folks, Patrick or Joe, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, Bill states it well, right? You know, it's utilize all the data you can, and you know, it's just way operations goes, right? You take with you roll with what you get, what the situation presents, and you don't always have the optimal circumstances. You know, systems break. It's understandable. It happens, and yeah, no, it's just all about adaptability.
And I remember during your presentation, you stressed adaptation, and that's the magic word, isn't it? When unexpected things happen, we have to adapt. Scott Lindstrom has a question here. It looks to have been a clear day, so the GOES are level 2, total precipitable water or stability indices could have picked out some of the gradients. Were these products part of the AWIPS real estate? In other words, what kinds of products get subbed in for the radar when the radar is not there?
Yeah, sure. You know, I would say in event they weren't, and pre-event I've been for the most part in my basement since March of 2020. So and I was running most of the mesoanalysis, and we have access to a majority of the data from home, but some of those, you know, second level or higher order products and things like that, it's just a little bit harder to find online. And so I think, what we've really kind of also stressed is at the same time kind of keeping it, simple, and then go complex when you have to. I think, just, applying our key conceptual models to, water vapor and visible was able to give us a fairly clear depiction upon how what was going on. So I can't speak exactly what the forecasters are using. I know when we got in and when I got into the office during the event I was called in, that we were heavily in the warning ops, and so it was heavily into your kind of base bread and butter stuff. So especially we can flex the mesoanalysis position home to telework, but then there certainly are some data sets that are just not as easy to access as they are in the office.
Thank you. David Zath has a question regarding the GLM. Has anyone tried creating a history plan view display similar to the MRMS rotational tracks? Is there anyone that can chime in with an answer on that?
All I can say is that would be I think I've talked about, we've had discussions before, I think might have been in my previous office, of something similar to that, this kind of accumulation of GLM tracks, kind of like akin to like the mesh tracks or the rotation tracks, to kind of view this accumulated trend in the convection to see where is it cycling and things like that. So I think that would be definitely an interesting way to visualize the data. I think that gets to where our biggest opportunities are. I think we've really mined we've learned a lot already, and we've had this kind of exponential growth in the signals and the processes we can see. And now I think it's going to be harder to find those new bigger things, but I think our biggest opportunities are probably going to be more in just the ways in which we visualize the data, and things like that I think are really interesting to be able to capture, again, kind of more of a trend view, which is, hey, the trends are important, right? So that's a great idea. I'm not sure if any of the other satellite folks on the line would have any sense of the feasibility or if that's been looked at.
Alrighty, thanks. We've got a couple of additional questions. We are getting short on time here. So Bob Bright asked, do you think staffing a mesoanalyst for every event should be a priority, giving staffing challenges? And if you're not used to using a mesoanalyst, how important do you think it is based on this experience and other experiences?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think it's something that we've definitely tried to reinvigorate, right? In the sense we probably should have never really lost it, but we've definitely seen a reinvigoration of that across the agency, and obviously it's an absolutely critical position. The question comes into specialization. Not everyone is strong suit as meso A or severe convection, right? And so it's, how deep of a bench do you have in your office, and how deep of a bench do you have of availability, considering that this is pretty much peak leave time. And so that's where we've seen in Central Region experimenting with remote mesoanalyst support, and that is a big help, and looking to increase that pool size as well. So it gets into, I think everyone identifies the need that it's nice to have, but you definitely get to a much smaller subset of people who really feel comfortable in actually filling that position, that role, and that's okay, right? Not everyone's the all-star radar operator, not everyone's the all-star social media person, and so it gets into specializations and putting people in the right seats, and there's only so many people that are available to put in that seat. So I don't know, Joe, do you have any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think when you can utilize the mesoanalyst role, and you have to practice it to get good at it, and for it to really be effective. But when you do it, you're ending up making a better product in the end. You're making better warning decisions, or decisions not to warn. And so to me, it's we're shortchanging our customers and the public by not having a mesoanalyst role in our larger severe weather events when there's a lot on the line. And the difference between a 20-minute lead time and a 30-minute lead time can mean something, or the when convection is spitting up fast, or when things are evolving, or you can anticipate a splitting supercell. I mean, it's I think it's a very good value to the taxpayer in the end. If you can put out the best product, if you put out the best warnings, why wouldn't you? And having a mesoanalyst role is really up there with doing it. So we make it part of our severe weather plan when we have high-end weather events, because we think it's so important.
Yeah, and you make a good point there, Joe, that it's not just about it's also about not issuing, right? And sometimes those best warning decisions are deciding you don't need one, right? Or we're gonna, instead of you tossing out at everything, the environment says, we can hold back for a while, right? And that's important too.
And our job is not to produce average or poor warnings, it's to produce the best possible warning product. And for an office like ours, where we get just a handful of severe weather days a year, when we have severe weather days, we want to nail them. We want to do the best possible job we can do. And having a mesoanalyst, having radar teams, that's how we do it. Performance matters, because ultimately it makes my job as a WCM a lot easier when we produce a great product and people take the warnings more seriously.
All righty. Well, thank you. Thank you very much, you guys. It was great presentation again. Thanks for all the questions. I apologize, we're not going to get to all the questions and comments. We are out of time. As in fact, your facilitator has allowed us to go a little bit over time. I apologize for that, but it's all worthwhile. So thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. I'm going to turn it back over to Jordan now for some final remarks.
All right, thank you, Stephen. And for those questions that we didn't get, we will be following up with the presenters, and we'll try to get back to the people asking the questions, and also make sure that we have everything documented, because we certainly want to get answers to all of your questions. Thank you, Patrick and Joe, for this presentation today. Very insightful. I always find it valuable to hear about a recent event that occurred, particularly over this past summer. And I think the salient point that I got out of it, that's something that I've tried to live my life by, is make sure you do the basic things, and that applies to satellite imagery, applies to a lot of things related to jobs and related to life. So I think that is a very good point to make, to go back to the basics. As has already been mentioned, we will continue the Satellite Book Club next week. Dr. Andy Heidinger, NESDIS Geo Senior Scientist, is going to be talking about the Cirrus band. So you may have been a little bit familiar with this band, but if you want to hear a little bit more about how it might be used, maybe people are calling your office asking about chemtrails. The Cirrus band is very interesting in some of that higher level Cirrus. So I hope you'll tune in next week. Should have an interesting presentation on hand. As always, if you have any questions related to the Satellite Book Club, or you are interested in satellite products, or you think something may be misconfigured in your AWIPS, Lee Byerly, Kashad Bowman, and the rest of the TRS team are standing by. They're great and ready to help, so just let them know. With that, once again, thank you so much to Stephen, Patrick, and Joe for your help today, and we'll see everybody next week. Until then, stay well.